began, drawing a shaky breath. Many years ago, I had just won first place at my company's annual award ceremony. It was a huge deal for me. The culmination of years of hard work. He paused, staring into the middle distance, as if reliving the memory. The ceremony was lavish. A black tie event, nothing spared. It felt like the best night of my life. I took the celebrations too far. Drank way more than I usually did. He glanced at Rebecca, a flicker of shame crossing his face. On the drive back to my lodge, I was driving through the mountains. Dark, windy roads, surrounded by forest. I was speeding, eager to get back and keep celebrating, I guess. And then I hit something. I hit it hard. Rebecca leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "What are you telling me, Craig? What did you hit?" He took a long swallow of his whiskey, the liquid doing little to calm his nerves. "I got out of the car," he continued, his voice low and strained. It was pitch black. I couldn't see anything. I looked around, tried to find what I'd hit, but I couldn't. The brush guard of my truck must have pushed it deep into the forest. He shivered, despite the warmth of the room. And then I felt it. The undeniable icy piercing of eyes staring into my soul. Rebecca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I couldn't see them, not exactly," Craig continued. "I could tell the general direction they were coming from, but not exactly where. I scrambled back into my car and raced off as fast as I could." He paused, shunning her gaze. "And after that, my shadow started following me, killing everything I dared to get close to, including my family." Tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes. "Your family?" she whispered. Craig nodded, his face etched with pain. "Sharon, Tom, it was all because of me. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding. I feel like it's keeping my daughter alive, so I am forced to stay in the state. I believe it tracks me down and walks everywhere it goes, and I highly doubt it ever sleeps based on the distance it seems able to cover. Rebecca stared at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and horror. "Craig," she said, her voice trembling, "are you saying that you're being followed by some kind of monster?" "Monster?" Craig repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "No, that word doesn't do it justice. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that this entity is extremely intelligent, calculating, and purposeful with its actions. Monsters are loud, brash, and grotesque. This is something else entirely." He leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Tell me, Rebecca, what did you see at the lake earlier today?" She hesitated, her brow creased in concentration. "I saw you," she said slowly. "I saw you walking towards my car, waving. You were wearing the same clothes you had on at the office the day you came in. You had the same walk." Her eyes widened, realization dawning on her face. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "How is that possible?" Craig sighed. "It's called a duck whistle," he said, his voice flat. A duck whistle," she repeated, her confusion evident. "It's the same thing a duck hunter does when hunting," he explained. "They use a call to mimic the sound of a duck, to lure it in. The shadow, it mimicked everything about me that would draw you in. The way I move, the way I walk, the way I dress. It used my image against me." Rebecca stared at him, her face pale with shock. That's terrifying." "Yes," Craig said, his voice grim. "It is." She shook her head, trying to process the information. "But why me?" she asked. Why would it want to hurt me? Craig's gaze softened, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. Remember last night at the bar, he said gently, when you came close to me, when you spoke to me. That's why. Rebecca's question hung in the air, a stark reminder of the reality of their situation. Where am I going to sleep? Craig hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated house. He led her to his room, the only space that could be considered remotely habitable. Even then, it was sparsely furnished, with a worn-out bed, a rickety nightstand, and a single bare bulb illuminating the space. She looked around, her expression a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "I'll take the couch," he replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Her eyes widened, a hint of panic flashing across her face. She looked around the room again, searching for an alternative. "You don't have to," she said, sounding concerned. Craig rummaged through his duffel bag, pulling out a large, faded t-shirt. He handed it to her. "Here," he said. "This should be more comfortable than what you're wearing." He hesitated, then added, "I can sleep on the floor in here, if that will make you feel safer." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. He stepped out of the room, giving her some privacy while she changed for bed, the whiskey burning its way down his throat, doing little to soothe his nerves. When he returned, Rebecca was under the covers, her body curled into a tight ball, her knuckles white as she clutched the sheets. Craig began to ready himself to sleep on the floor, arranging a makeshift pillow from a pile of clothes. "Craig," she said softly, her voice trembling. He looked up, his brow creased. "What is it?" "Please," she said, her eyes pleading. "Please sleep in the bed." He hesitated, his mind racing. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Something is out there," she whispered, her voice choked with fear. Something is trying to kill me. Please, please get in the bed. He climbed into the bed, careful not to disturb her. The mattress sagged beneath his weight, the springs groaning in protest. He lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling, his body rigid with tension. Then she snuggled closer, her body pressing against his. A soft sob escaping her lips, followed by another and another. She was crying silently, her body shaking with the force of her emotions. He didn't know what to do. He hadn't held another human being like this in longer than he could remember. His arms hovered awkwardly in the air, unsure of where to go. He felt the soft jerks of her body as she cried, each tremor sending a jolt of awareness through him. He was intensely aware of her presence, of the warmth of her skin against his, of the gentle pressure of her body against his side. It was an intimacy he hadn't experienced in years, a connection that both comforted and terrified him. She tucked her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly, tentatively, wrapped his arms around her in return. Her hair smelled of lavender and sunshine, a comforting, familiar scent that transported him back to a simpler time. Her skin, that fair epidermis, felt as soft as the down of a fledgling bird, a delicate canvas upon which the faintest of blushes did paint themselves. The thin material of the shirt, a gossamer veil, did shift and stir with each gentle breath, revealing the subtle curves and contours of her form, a whispered promise of earthly delight. He held her close, the weight of her grief a heavy burden in his arms. He felt a strange mixture of protectiveness and vulnerability, a sense of connection that he hadn't thought possible. In that moment, lying in the darkness, holding a stranger in his arms, Craig felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't entirely alone. The morning light, filtering through the grimy window, cast a pallid glow on the cramped kitchen. They sat at the small, rickety table, sipping mugs of lukewarm, low-quality coffee. It was a far cry from the meticulously brewed lattes and organic pastries Rebecca was likely accustomed to. But she didn't complain. The t-shirt she wore to sleep in hung just low enough to be tantalizing, revealing a glimpse of collarbone while simultaneously concealing any further secrets. Craig tried to avert his gaze, but his eyes kept straying back, his mind conjuring images he knew he shouldn't be entertaining. She seemed more accepting of the reality of their situation this morning, a fragile resilience replacing the terror of the previous night. She even managed to crack a smile, a hesitant, tentative expression that warmed Craig's heart. He learned that she had no family in Harlow. Only her cat, Kylie Minogue, had been her companion. The thought of leaving her feline friend behind brought a fresh wave of sadness to her eyes. Rebecca kept pushing stray strands of hair away from her face, a nervous habit that Craig found strangely endearing. Then a realization seemed to dawn on her. "Oh my God," she said, her voice filled with dismay. "I basically have no job anymore, do I? Not after you told me not to contact anyone." Craig nodded, his expression grim. "We need to stick together," he said. "It's not safe for you to be alone." He paused. Then a flicker of an idea sparked in his eyes. "I think I can do something about the job situation, though." He turned to the stove, where he was frying up a makeshift breakfast of eggs and bacon. "You know," he said, "I could really use a personal assistant. Someone to help me organize my schedule, manage my paperwork, keep me from going completely insane." He glanced at her, a playful grin spreading across his face. "And I know I can afford it." "Are you serious?" Rebecca asked, her eyes widening with surprise. "Absolutely," Craig said. "Of course, it all depends on how you do during your interview, which, conveniently, will be conducted during breakfast." He plated the breakfast, placing a generous portion in front of Rebecca. As they ate, he launched into a mock interview, peppering her with questions about her skills, her experience, her ambitions. But beneath the guise of professionalism, a playful flirtation simmered. They teased each other, laughed together, and shared stories, their connection deepening with each passing moment. It was a welcome respite from the darkness that surrounded them, a brief oasis of normalcy in a world gone mad. Craig knew they couldn't stay holed up in the house. They needed to prepare. He showed Rebecca how to handle the firearm, emphasizing the rules of safety with a gravity that brooked no argument. Her initial fear gave way to a grim determination as she practiced loading and unloading the weapon, her hands growing steadier with each repetition. They left the house, venturing into the harsh light of day. Craig drove to a strip mall on the outskirts of town, a collection of generic stores offering a mix of necessities and cheap thrills. The mission: to assemble a survival bag for Rebecca, a mobile kit containing clothing, toiletries, and enough supplies to keep her going, and to allow her to snatch it up and leave at a moment's notice. In a dimly lit discount store, Rebecca began gathering items: practical clothes, sturdy shoes, a first aid kit, a flashlight. But she also gravitated towards things that offered a small measure of comfort: a soft blanket, a travel-sized bottle of her favorite perfume, a worn paperback copy of a beloved novel. Rebecca, liberated from her work attire, began trying on outfits that reflected her personality: a fitted leather jacket, ripped jeans, a band t-shirt. She struck a pose in front of Craig, a playful glint in her eyes. "What do you think?" He swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. She looked incredible, vibrant and alive, but he knew it was too dangerous, too much attention. "It's nice," he said, his voice strained, "but maybe something a little less noticeable." Her face fell. Disappointment clouded her features. "Oh," she said softly. "Right." She tried on another outfit, this one more subdued, more practical. But it lacked the spark, the energy that had drawn him to her in the first place. It killed him inside to keep toning her down, to stifle her self-expression. He wanted her to be herself, to embrace her individuality, but he couldn't risk it, not with the shadow lurking. He watched her, his heart aching with a mixture of desire and guilt. He was turning her into a prisoner, just like he was. Rebecca was a revelation. Her sharp organizational skills, honed through years of managing demanding doctors and navigating the complex politics of a medical practice, translated seamlessly into her new role as Craig's personal assistant. It lent an air of professionalism to their operation, a veneer of legitimacy that helped them blend into the background. The sound of her honey-sweet voice, smooth and persuasive, as she called ahead to confirm meetings, was a balm to Craig's jangled nerves. She had a knack for making people feel at ease, for disarming even the most skeptical clients. Before each meeting, she would offer him a few words of encouragement, a subtle pep talk that boosted his confidence and sharpened his focus. And during the meetings, she would watch him, her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fascination, as he masterfully guided the conversation, molding it to his will, while somehow ensuring that the client felt fully satisfied, as if Craig were doing them a personal favor. He made it seem effortless, a natural talent that both intrigued and impressed her. She would get lost in staring at him, her mind drifting away from the minutiae of the meeting as she handed him information as and when he requested. And what she saw when she truly looked at him was a study in contrasts. His visage, etched with the harsh lines of experience, did speak of battles fought and demons wrestled. The set of his jaw, firm and resolute, hinted at an inner strength, a will that refused to be broken. Yet, in the depths of his eyes, a haunting sorrow did linger, a shadow of grief that whispered of unspeakable loss. When he spoke, his voice, a resonant baritone, did command attention, weaving a tapestry of knowledge and persuasion. He moved with a controlled grace, his gestures precise and deliberate, as if every action were carefully calculated. Yet, there were moments, fleeting and subtle, when the mask would slip, revealing a glimpse of the vulnerability that lay beneath. She saw the intelligence that sparked in his eyes as he analyzed a problem, the empathy that softened his features when he listened to a client's concerns, the passion that ignited in his spirit when he spoke about his work. She saw a man who was broken, yes, but also a man who was trying to heal. A man who was haunted by his past, but determined to forge a new future. A man who was capable of both great darkness and great light. And as she watched him, Rebecca felt a pull, a connection that transcended mere admiration. She was drawn to his strength, his vulnerability, his unwavering determination to protect her. She knew that he was a damaged man, but she also knew that he was a good man, a man worth fighting for. Life settled into a rhythm, a strange blend of normalcy and paranoia. They moved every 3 months, never staying in one place long enough to attract attention. 4 times they packed up their meager belongings, leaving behind half-empty apartments and fleeting acquaintances, always looking over their shoulders, always anticipating the shadow's next move. Yet, amidst the transience and uncertainty, a sense of stability began to emerge. Rebecca proved to be an invaluable asset, not only as Craig's assistant, but also as his confidant and companion. They worked tirelessly, traveling from city to city, servicing clients and staying one step ahead of their pursuer. And every night they shared a bed. The imminent feeling of dread that had consumed Rebecca in the beginning had gradually subsided, replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance and trust. She knew that danger still lurked, but she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had Craig, and he had her. They hadn't crossed the threshold into making love. Not yet. The fear of intimacy, the fear of vulnerability, still lingered, holding them back. They hadn't even kissed. But every night, as they lay side by side in the darkness, they would hold one another. A simple embrace, a silent reassurance that they were both still there, that they were both still alive. It was a connection that transcended the physical, a bond forged in shared trauma and mutual resilience. And in those moments, holding Rebecca in his arms, Craig felt a flicker of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, he could escape his past, that he could find redemption, that he could finally be free. One night, as they lay side by side in the darkness, the silence was broken by Rebecca's voice, soft and trembling. "Craig," she whispered, I need to tell you something." He turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what was coming. He had seen it in her eyes, felt it in her touch, sensed it in the way she looked at him. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it's crazy. I know it's probably the worst possible time, but I can't hold it any longer. I love you, Craig." He stared at her, his mind reeling. He had longed to hear those words, had dreamt of this moment. But now that it was finally here, he was paralyzed with fear. Fear that if they got any closer, he would be sure to lose her. Rebecca, sensing his hesitation, reached out and gently touched his face. "It's okay if you don't feel the same way," she said, her voice filled with vulnerability. "I just needed you to know." And then she did something that took his breath away. She gently retreated from him, standing to her feet. She slowly, deliberately untied the belt of her bathrobe. The soft fabric slipped from her shoulders, cascading to the floor, revealing her perfect naked body. Craig gasped, his eyes widening with awe. He had imagined this moment, had fantasized about it countless times, but the reality was far more splendid than anything his imagination could have conjured. Her form, bathed in the soft moonlight, was a symphony of curves and contours, a masterpiece sculpted by nature's own hand. Her skin, as pale as alabaster, seemed to glow with an inner radiance, a luminescence that captivated his gaze. The gentle swell of her breasts, the delicate curve of her waist, the graceful sweep of her hips. Each line, each shadow, Each subtle detail was a testament to her beauty, a testament to the power of the feminine form. And beyond the physical perfection, he saw something else. He saw her vulnerability, her courage, her willingness to lay herself bare, both physically and emotionally, before him. He saw her love shining in her eyes, beckoning him to take a leap of faith, to embrace the possibility of happiness. He reached out his hand, trembling, and gently caressed her cheek. "Rebecca," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He didn't need to say anything more. She knew. She saw it in his eyes, felt it in his touch. They embraced, their bodies melding together in a desperate, passionate embrace. They kissed a kiss that was long overdue, a kiss that spoke of longing, of desire, of a love that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. They made love throughout the night, their bodies exploring each other with a tenderness and passion that banished all fear and doubt. They surrendered to the moment, lost in the ecstasy of their newfound intimacy. And as they lay entwined in each other's arms, exhausted but content, they knew that their bond had been cemented, that they had become one. The following months were a dream, a period of unparalleled joy, a time when the darkness seemed to recede, replaced by the warmth of love and companionship. Neither Craig nor Rebecca could ever imagine being happier. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their temporary rental, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, Craig, with the most certainty he had ever felt in his life, took Rebecca's hand in his and asked her to marry him. Tears welled up in her eyes, and a radiant smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." But as the initial euphoria subsided, they began to consider the ramifications. The shadow still loomed, a constant threat to their happiness. Could they truly build a life together, knowing that danger was always lurking? "Maybe," Rebecca said hesitantly one night. "Maybe it's gone. Maybe the shadow has moved on. It hasn't shown up in years, has it? Craig dismissed the suggestion sharply, his face hardening with a familiar fear. Don't say that, he snapped. It's not possible. It's always there, waiting. They agreed to keep the wedding a secret, to invite no one, to simply go to the courthouse for a quiet, private ceremony. It was a compromise, a way to minimize the risk, to protect themselves from the shadow's potential wrath. But as the days drew closer to the wedding day, Craig couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing something wrong. He couldn't bear the thought of getting married without telling his daughter, without sharing his happiness with the one person who still mattered most to him. So late one night, after Rebecca had fallen asleep, he picked up the phone and dialed Steffi's number. After exchanging pleasantries and catching up on life, Craig took a deep breath and told her about Rebecca. "I'm getting married," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "In a few days." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. And then Steffi's voice, filled with warmth and happiness. "Dad, that's wonderful," she exclaimed. "I'm so happy for you. I've heard the difference in your voice for a few months now." She paused and then said, "I'd love to come to the wedding." Craig hesitated. "There won't be one," he said quietly. "It's just going to be a small private ceremony at the courthouse." "I don't mind," Steffi said. "I'd still love to be there, to celebrate with you." Reluctantly, Craig agreed. But he insisted on handling all the travel arrangements, wanting to control every aspect of the situation to minimize any potential risk. Steffi had never been told about the shadow, so Craig's peculiar behavior seemed a bit strange to her. She knew her father was a private person, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping something from her. She missed him terribly and longed to reconnect with him, to build the relationship that had been fractured by grief and loss. Craig meticulously planned every detail of Steffi's arrival. He had arranged for a rental car under Rebecca's name, a nondescript sedan that wouldn't attract attention. He had even mapped out her route, deliberately choosing a winding, circuitous path that added 70 miles to the journey. He needed the extra time, the added distance, to ensure her safety. He had also instructed her to purchase a burner phone and keep her location tracking active throughout her travels. It was a measure of control, a way to monitor her progress and anticipate any potential threats. As Steffi made her way towards them, Craig and Rebecca waited patiently, constantly checking the tracking marker on Craig's phone. They were both on edge, their nerves stretched taut with anticipation. Rebecca, eager to make a good impression, had dressed in a magnificent white summer dress, adorned with delicate little flowers. A matching flower-embedded Alice band held her hair back from her face, revealing her radiant smile. She looked like a vision, a breath of fresh air in Craig's chaotic life. Craig, wanting to honor the occasion, had donned his finest dark navy suit. It was a stark contrast to his usual attire of jeans and t-shirts, a symbol of his commitment to Rebecca and his desire to make this day special for her. They sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of the simple lunch they had prepared for their return from the courthouse. It was to be a modest affair, a far cry from the lavish celebrations they both deserved, but it would be filled with love and hope. Rebecca was a bundle of nervous energy, her excitement tempered by a touch of apprehension. She was eager to meet Steffi, to finally connect with Craig's daughter and become a part of his family. But she also worried about what Steffi would think of her, about whether she would be accepted into their lives. She was also excited, almost giddy, at the prospect of finally becoming Mrs. Rebecca Taylor. It was a dream she had never dared to imagine, a chance at happiness that she had never thought possible. As they waited, Craig couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach, a premonition of impending doom. He knew that the shadow was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The tracker showed Steffi pulling into the street right on schedule, following the prescribed route. A wave of relief washed over him, briefly eclipsing his anxiety. He had done it. He had protected her. The car, covered in a thick layer of dust, pulled up to the house. It looked like it had travelled through a sandstorm, but Craig's focus wasn't on the state of the vehicle. He was fixated on the driver. He hadn't seen Steffi in over 4 years. He expected a young woman, vibrant and full of life, eager to embrace her father and his new bride. Instead, a tall, gaunt man gracefully alighted from the vehicle. He was wearing a disheveled suit, the fabric rumpled and stained. A single white flower was scruffily stapled to his lapel, a grotesque parody of celebration. Craig froze, his blood turning to ice. He recognized the figure instantly. It was the man from his nightmares, the man from the dark forest, the man with the crossbow. The man casually locked the car, his movements deliberate and unnervingly calm. He walked towards the house, his eyes fixed on Craig. He walked past Craig, his shoulder brushing against his, a chilling reminder of his physical presence. The man glided into the small living room, his movements unsettlingly fluid and graceful for someone so imposing. He gestured with a long, slender hand for them to sit. The gesture was almost courtly, but the chilling emptiness in his eyes belied any pretense of politeness. He didn't seem to be holding any weapons, but Craig knew better. He knew that this man was a weapon himself, a force of nature disguised in human form. After they were all seated, an unbearable tension filling the cramped space, Craig finally found his voice. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. The man sitting across from them didn't answer. He simply smiled, a chillingly vacant expression that sent a shiver down Rebecca's spine. After a pregnant pause, the man finally spoke, his voice surprisingly velvety and proper. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, his gaze settling on Rebecca. "You look beautiful on this special day." His eyes A soft, almost gentle brown seemed to possess an unnatural depth, an unnerving ability to see into her very soul. And yet, they held no warmth, no empathy, only a cold, unwavering purpose. He smelt of nothing. Rebecca, her face pale with terror, managed to choke out a question. "What do you want?" He turned his gaze back to her, his smile widening. "Mrs. Taylor," he repeated, savoring the sound of her new name. "I'm here for what belongs to me." Craig, his control finally snapping, lunged forward. "Where's my daughter?" he roared, his hands clenched into fists. The shadow raised a hand, stopping Craig in his tracks. "Please, Craig," he said, his voice laced with a hint of weariness. "Must you be so rude? It's really not necessary." He turned his attention back to Rebecca, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "would you be so kind as to pour me a glass of cranberry juice from the fridge? I'm feeling rather parched." Rebecca's eyes widened in shock, but she found herself compelled to obey. She rose from her seat, her legs trembling, and walked to the refrigerator. She poured a glass of juice, her hands shaking so badly that she nearly spilled it. She returned to the living room and handed the glass to the shadow, who accepted it with a gracious nod. He placed it carefully on the rickety coffee table, pulling one of Craig's pharmaceutical pamphlets from his pocket to use as a coaster. He took a sip of the juice, his eyes closing in apparent satisfaction. "Ah," he said, sighing contentedly. "Perfect. Now, where were we?" He leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping over them both. "True happiness," he said, his voice taking on a philosophical tone. "It's a fleeting thing, isn't it? A fragile butterfly that flits and flutters, always just out of reach. It's the culmination of love, trust, companionship, connection that transcends the ordinary." He paused, his gaze settling on Craig, a hint of mockery in his eyes. And that, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, is what I'm here to collect. He turned his gaze to Craig, his soft brown eyes hardening with a chilling intensity. You know, he said, his voice laced with a hint of melancholy. I met her when we were both just 11 years old. She lived 2 farms away, yet without fail, I would traverse the back routes to stay out of sight of the elders, just to play together. He paused, a wistful smile gracing his lips. We eventually grew up and chose to leave all this. He gestured dismissively at the dilapidated house. Behind, we moved into the deep forest and made a living that poured pure life into one another. I relied on her to breathe, so I made sure I tracked down everything we needed so she could eat. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. We left the world to you, he said, his voice dripping with venom. Yet you still had to come and take mine. Rebecca, her eyes wide with confusion, turned to Craig. What is he talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. He turned to gaze to Rebecca, his expression softening. He didn't tell you, did he? He said, his voice filled with feigned sympathy. Craig, his face ashen, muttered a weak denial. I did, he said. I told her. Shadow scanned Rebecca's face, his eyes probing, searching. No, Craig, he said, his voice firm. You didn't tell her everything. Tell your wife what you did to me. Craig's body seemed to deflate before their eyes. The years of repressed guilt and fear finally collapsed upon him. I ran her over, he stammered, his voice barely audible. I didn't see her. It was dark, and she was dressed in dark clothes. She just walked into the road. The shadow smiled, a chillingly knowing expression. Ah, but that's not quite the whole story, is it, Craig? I checked the tire marks left behind. You clearly veered off the road due to your intoxication. and struck her. He paused, his eyes boring into Craig's soul. Tell her what you did next, Craig. Craig dropped his head, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Rebecca, her face a mask of horror, choked out a question. He left, she whispered. He left her there to die. The man shook his head, a hint of disappointment in his eyes. Oh, but that's not the worst of it, is it, Craig? Tell her everything. Leave nothing out. Craig continued, his voice a tortured whisper. I got out of the car. I went into the tall grass, and I found her. Her body, it was horrifically mangled. He paused, his breath hitching in his throat. She was calm. She asked me what happened. I told her I didn't know. I held her hand, tried to comfort her. Tears streamed down his face as he continued. I got scared, he sobbed. I knew I would lose everything if I stuck around. So I got up to leave. And then, the man prompted, his voice like a silken thread tightening around Craig's throat. She said, Craig choked out. She said, Craig, please don't leave me. He paused, his body racked with sobs. I was still wearing the name sticker from the awards ceremony, he whispered. My name and surname neatly printed out. He looked up at the ceiling, his eyes filled with anguish. I swore into the dark sky. The gentleman leaned forward, his voice a menacing whisper. And then, Craig, tell her what you did then. Rebecca, her face contorted with pain, reached out to him, her hand trembling. Stop, she pleaded, her voice filled with anguish. Please, Craig, stop talking. Craig ignored her, his gaze fixed on the shadow. I got on top of her mangled, grotesque body, and I strangled her. I strangled her until she went still. gasp escaped Rebecca's lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. The gentleman nodded, a look of satisfaction spreading across his face. "Yes, that's right," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "And when I arrived," he continued, his gaze shifting to Rebecca, "I had heard the loud bang, then made my way to the sound to search for my partner. He arrived when Craig was shaking her as he choked her, and by the time he was close, Craig was running to his car and driving off. The shadow leaned forward, his movements eerily graceful, and retrieved a crossbow from beneath the couch. He placed it in his lap, his fingers gently caressing smooth wood. Rebecca, her face streaked with tears, turned to Craig, her eyes burning with hatred. "You're an animal," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. She wiped her tears away, her gaze hardening as she looked directly at him. "You're an animal," she repeated. The man chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a chill down their spines. "Enough," he said, his voice laced with impatience. "I seek my Assythment now. Please, will it be you, Craig, or her?" Craig wept silently, his body shaking uncontrollably. He released an inaudible murmur, his voice lost in the depths of his grief. Shadow leaned closer, his eyes narrowed. "Speak up, Craig," he demanded, his voice laced with menace. "I want to hear it." Rebecca leaned closer to Craig, her hand gently caressing his cheek. "Don't do it, Craig," she whispered, her voice filled with love. "Don't sacrifice yourself for me." Craig looked at her, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. "I'll go with you," he said, his voice barely audible. "Leave her here, please. Just leave her." With those words spoken, the man's hand moved. He rested it on his lap, and instantly an arrow flew through Rebecca's chest, pushing her back into her seat. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Her eyes glazed over, all life instantly draining from them. Craig released a gut-wrenching shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. He lunged towards Rebecca, grabbing hold of her limp body, desperately trying to arouse life from her eyes by gently smacking her face. But it was no use. She was gone. The gentleman stood up, his face devoid of emotion. "Let's go, Craig," he said calmly, his voice flat and emotionless. "It's just you and I now."